Long before humanity built kingdoms, wrote laws, or fought wars across the earth, there was another kingdom untouched by suffering, untouched by death, untouched by fear. Heaven stood in perfect order beneath the authority of God, filled with beings created for worship, loyalty, and peace. But hidden within that perfection was a mystery that would change eternity forever. Because the first rebellion did not begin on earth. It began in heaven itself. And at the center of that rebellion stood the most admired being ever created. His name was Lucifer. He was not a monster in the beginning. He was not feared. He was celebrated. The angels honored him. Heaven trusted him. And for ages beyond human understanding, he stood closer to the throne of God than any other created being. But something happened to Lucifer that no angel expected. Something silent. Something dangerous. A thought entered his heart that would eventually lead to war in heaven and destruction on earth. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why Lucifer became heaven's most dangerous angel, we first have to understand who he was before the fall. Most people imagine Lucifer as a creature of darkness from the very beginning, but the ancient descriptions tell a completely different story. Lucifer was created with beauty beyond human imagination. He was described as perfect in wisdom and unmatched in splendor. Many scholars believe he held one of the highest positions in heaven, serving near the throne of God itself. In ancient writings and interpretations passed down through generations, Lucifer was often portrayed as a guardian of divine glory, a being clothed in precious stones and radiant light. Every movement reflected majesty. Every word carried influence. Among the heavenly host, there was no one like him. And perhaps that was the beginning of the problem. Because admiration can slowly change a person, power can reshape the heart. History on earth has proven this over and over again. Leaders admired by millions begin believing they are greater than the people who placed them there. Men trusted with authority slowly convinced themselves that rules no longer apply to them. Lucifer's story follows the same pattern, but on a scale far beyond human history. The closer he stood to glory, the more he became aware of his own greatness. And somewhere deep within him, admiration slowly became obsession. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Heaven continued in peace. Worship continued around the throne of God. The angels carried out their assignments across creation. But according to ancient interpretations, Lucifer had begun seeing himself differently. He no longer viewed himself simply as a servant of heaven. He began comparing himself to the authority above him. And comparison is dangerous because it quietly changes gratitude into resentment. The very gifts that once brought him honor began feeding a hunger inside him. A hunger for more. This is what made Lucifer so dangerous. It was not his strength alone. It was not his beauty alone. It was not even his position. It was his influence. He understood heaven better than any other angel. He understood worship. He understood authority. He understood how to persuade others. And over time, that influence began spreading. Ancient traditions suggest that Lucifer slowly convinced other angels to question the order of heaven itself. He did not begin with open rebellion. He began with ideas, questions, doubts. Pride rarely arrives through force. It arrives through persuasion. And what Lucifer discovered about heaven would ultimately start a war no one thought possible. The terrifying reality is that rebellion did not begin with armies gathering in open conflict. It began in conversations, quiet moments, thoughts hidden from others. Many believe Lucifer became convinced that he deserved more than worship around the throne. He wanted the throne itself. Ancient passages describe his ambition clearly. He declared within himself that he would ascend above the stars of God and make himself like the Most High. Those words were more than pride. They were a direct challenge to divine authority. Creation itself was now attempting to replace the Creator. Imagine the shock that must have spread through heaven. For ages there had only been peace, order, and worship. Then suddenly, the most trusted angel began leading resistance against the throne of God. Some angels remained loyal. Others followed Lucifer. And in that moment, heaven faced something it had never experienced before: division. The rebellion of Lucifer carries a terrifying lesson because evil did not first appear through ugliness or weakness. It appeared through greatness corrupted by pride. That is why this story has survived across generations. It reflects something deeply human: the desire for recognition, the temptation of power, the danger of believing we deserve worship instead of giving it. Lucifer's fall was not sudden. It was gradual. A slow transformation hidden beneath beauty and brilliance until the rebellion finally revealed what had been growing inside him all along. For countless generations, people have asked the same question again and again. How could Lucifer fall? How could a being created in the direct presence of God become the first rebel in all of creation? It is a question that has troubled scholars, theologians, and historians for centuries because Lucifer was not created weak, corrupted, or broken. He was created magnificent. Ancient descriptions portray him as a guardian of extraordinary beauty and wisdom, a being surrounded by glory and entrusted with immense responsibility in heaven itself. Nothing about Lucifer's beginning suggested disaster. Nothing about his position suggested rebellion. Yet somehow, the most honored angel in heaven became its greatest threat. And maybe that is exactly why this story feels so disturbing. Because Lucifer's rebellion forces humanity to confront a terrifying possibility. Evil did not begin in darkness. It began in the presence of light. Before wars devastated nations, before violence spread across the earth, before humanity tasted suffering, rebellion had already entered heaven through the heart of one angel. That raises a deeper question many people struggle to answer. If heaven was perfect, then how could evil exist there at all? How could corruption form in a place untouched by pain, death, or human weakness? The mystery surrounding Lucifer is frightening because it challenges the idea that perfection alone prevents rebellion. Somehow, despite standing near divine glory itself, Lucifer became consumed by something that transformed him from heaven's most admired angel into its greatest enemy. What made Lucifer even more dangerous was not simply his power. Heaven contained many powerful beings. What separated Lucifer from the others was influence. He understood the structure of heaven better than anyone else. He understood loyalty. He understood worship. He understood authority. And according to ancient interpretations, he also understood how to persuade others. Lucifer did not begin his rebellion openly. He did not march toward the throne declaring war from the beginning. The change happened gradually, quietly, almost invisibly. The terrifying truth is this: Lucifer did not become dangerous overnight. His fall happened slowly, silently, almost invisibly. The pride growing within him remained hidden beneath beauty and wisdom for far longer than anyone expected. And by the time heaven realized what was happening, it was already too late. To truly understand why Lucifer became heaven's most dangerous angel, you first have to understand how extraordinary he once was. Because according to ancient scripture and generations of interpretation, Lucifer was not an ordinary angel standing among countless others in heaven. He occupied a position unlike any other created being. He stood closest to the throne of God itself. While humanity struggles to imagine heaven through paintings and imagination, ancient descriptions present Lucifer as a being surrounded by brilliance, authority, and unimaginable beauty. Precious stones covered him like royal garments. Light reflected from his presence. Wisdom flowed through him. Among the heavenly host, Lucifer symbolized perfection. Everything about him inspired admiration. And perhaps that is what made his eventual rebellion so shocking to heaven itself. Lucifer wasn't feared in heaven. He was admired. The other angels did not look at Lucifer with suspicion. They looked at him with honor. He carried influence naturally. His presence commanded attention. Some ancient traditions even suggest that music and worship were connected to his role in heaven, making him not only powerful, but deeply connected to the atmosphere surrounding the throne of God. He was intelligent beyond human comprehension, charismatic in ways impossible to fully describe, and trusted with extraordinary responsibility. If anyone had appeared incapable of rebellion, it would have been Lucifer. But history has always shown the same pattern. Sometimes the most dangerous people are not the weakest, but the most gifted. Again and again throughout human history, the individuals who reshape nations, movements, and entire civilizations are often people blessed with influence, intelligence, and extraordinary ability. Gifted people attract attention. They inspire trust. Others naturally follow them. And over time, admiration can slowly become dangerous, especially when a person begins believing the praise surrounding them. Lucifer's story follows this same terrifying pattern, but on a cosmic scale far beyond human history. The more honor he received, the more aware he became of himself. The more beauty surrounded him, the more conscious he became of his own greatness. And somewhere deep within him, something began to shift. At first, the change was invisible. Lucifer still stood near the throne. He still moved among the angels. Heaven still viewed him as glorious. Nothing outwardly suggested rebellion. But internally, his focus had started changing. Instead of seeing his beauty as something given by God, Lucifer slowly began seeing it as something belonging entirely to himself. Instead of viewing his position as an act of divine trust, he began viewing it as evidence that he deserved even greater authority. That transformation did not happen in a single moment. It happened gradually, thought by thought, desire by desire, until admiration became obsession. And that is what makes Lucifer's story so unsettling even now. Pride rarely announces itself loudly in the beginning. It grows quietly. It feeds on praise. It survives on comparison. It convinces people they deserve more. Lucifer had spent ages surrounded by glory, power, and worship, but eventually even heaven itself no longer satisfied the hunger growing within him. Standing near the throne was no longer enough. Honor was no longer enough. Influence was no longer enough. Somewhere deep within his heart, Lucifer began wanting something that could never belong to any created being. He wanted the throne itself. And slowly, Lucifer stopped looking at God and started looking at himself. The frightening part of Lucifer's story is that nobody in heaven seemed to recognize the danger immediately. There was no sudden transformation, no instant collapse into darkness. The change happening inside Lucifer unfolded quietly beneath the surface, hidden behind the same beauty, wisdom, and authority that once made him admired throughout heaven. Outwardly, he still appeared magnificent. He still stood near the throne of God. He still carried influence among the angels. But internally, something dangerous had already taken root. And like many of history's greatest downfalls, it began inside the mind long before it appeared through actions. At some point, admiration turned inward. Lucifer no longer viewed himself through gratitude. He began viewing himself through comparison. The glory surrounding God became something he measured himself against. The worship filling heaven no longer inspired humility within him. Instead, it awakened desire. Ancient interpretations suggest Lucifer became consumed by the belief that someone as beautiful, wise, and influential as himself deserved greater recognition than he had been given. And the terrifying part is that this transformation did not happen through suffering or injustice. Lucifer was already honored beyond measure. Yet the more he focused on himself, the more entitled he became. Pride slowly convinced him that what belonged to God should somehow belong to him as well. The first sin did not begin with violence. It began with self-worship. That single shift changed everything. Because once Lucifer became obsessed with himself, heaven itself no longer looked the same through his eyes. Instead of seeing the throne of God as sacred authority, he began seeing it as something standing above him. Instead of seeing worship as an act of devotion, he began seeing it as power. And once ambition entered his heart, every part of heaven became connected to the question consuming him internally: why should God alone rule creation? Some believe Lucifer began influencing other angels long before the rebellion became public. That possibility makes the story even more disturbing. Because if true, it means rebellion spread through heaven quietly at first, through conversations, ideas, persuasion, and influence rather than open conflict. Lucifer understood the minds of the angels. He understood trust. He understood admiration. And perhaps he slowly used those things to plant doubt where loyalty once existed. Ancient scripture suggests that eventually a vast number of angels followed him. That level of influence does not happen overnight. It suggests something far more calculated was unfolding beneath heaven's perfect appearance. And this is where the mystery deepens even further. Was Lucifer deceived by pride, or was he intentionally planning a takeover? Even now, interpretations differ. Some believe his corruption blinded him slowly until he genuinely believed he deserved equality with God. Others believe Lucifer became fully aware of his rebellion long before heaven recognized the danger. Either possibility leads to the same terrifying conclusion. The most trusted angel in heaven had become its greatest threat, and what happened next would divide heaven forever. For a long time, the rebellion remained hidden beneath the surface of heaven. But eventually, the ambition growing inside Lucifer could no longer remain concealed. The thoughts that once lived silently within him began turning into open defiance. The angel who had once stood closest to the throne of God no longer desired to serve beside divine authority. He wanted to rise above it. And according to ancient scripture, the moment finally came when Lucifer openly revealed the desire that had been consuming him from the beginning. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Those words changed eternity forever. For the first time since creation began, heaven witnessed something unimaginable, creation challenging its creator. It is difficult for the human mind to fully understand the weight of that moment. Lucifer was not merely questioning authority. He was attempting to overthrow the order of heaven itself. The very being created to reflect glory now desired glory for himself. And once that declaration became known, division spread through heaven. Angels who had once worshipped together now stood on opposing sides of a conflict no one thought possible. Loyalty was tested, trust shattered. The peace of heaven itself collapsed beneath the weight of rebellion. Ancient interpretations describe a war unlike anything humanity has ever witnessed. Not a war fought for territory or wealth, but a battle over authority, worship, and the throne of heaven itself. The rebellion Lucifer had nurtured in secret finally exploded into open conflict. The same angel once admired throughout heaven now stood leading resistance against God. And according to scripture, he was not alone. A vast number of angels followed him. The influence Lucifer carried for ages had now become a weapon capable of dividing heaven itself. For the first time in eternity, heaven became a battlefield. The scale of the conflict is almost impossible to imagine. Heavenly armies gathering, angels choosing sides, thunder echoing across creation. Ancient texts describe Michael rising to lead the armies loyal to God against Lucifer and the angels who followed him into rebellion. And somewhere within that unimaginable conflict stood Lucifer himself, the former guardian of heavenly glory, now transformed into the leader of heaven's first rebellion. The same wisdom that once inspired admiration was now driving defiance. The same influence that once strengthened heaven was now tearing it apart. And perhaps the most tragic part of the story is this: Lucifer likely believed he could win. Pride had consumed him so deeply that he no longer saw himself as created. He saw himself as deserving equality with God. That is the terrifying nature of pride when it fully takes control. It blinds people to reality itself. History on Earth has repeated this pattern countless times. Leaders rise to power believing they are untouchable. Empires convince themselves they cannot fall. Men intoxicated by admiration begin believing they deserve worship. Lucifer's rebellion reflects the same destructive pattern, only on a cosmic scale beyond human comprehension. But even as war spread through heaven, the final outcome had not yet been revealed. The conflict continued. Heaven trembled beneath the rebellion Lucifer had unleashed. And for a moment that must have seemed impossible to the angels witnessing it, it appeared as though heaven itself stood on the edge of chaos. The rebellion could only end one way. No created being, no matter how powerful, could overthrow the authority of God. And eventually, the conflict that had shaken heaven reached its final moment. Lucifer, the angel once covered in glory and admired throughout heaven, faced the consequence of the very pride that had consumed him. The same being who once stood closest to the throne was now separated from it forever. According to Scripture, Lucifer and the angels who followed him were cast out of heaven entirely. The rebellion ended in defeat. But the emotional weight of that fall reaches far beyond the image of punishment alone. Because this was not simply the removal of an enemy. This was the collapse of the most honored angel heaven had ever known. The angel who once stood closest to God was cast out of heaven, not because he lacked beauty, not because he lacked wisdom, but because pride consumed him. There is something deeply tragic about Lucifer's fall when you truly think about it. He had everything most beings could never even imagine possessing: beauty, influence, power, authority, honor. Yet none of it satisfied the desire growing within him. The closer Lucifer stood to greatness, the more he became consumed by himself. And eventually, the very gifts that once elevated him became the reason for his destruction. The wisdom that should have produced humility became arrogance. The influence that should have strengthened loyalty became rebellion. The beauty that should have reflected glory became the object of his own obsession. And suddenly, the most admired angel in heaven became its greatest warning. Lucifer's story is terrifying because it reveals something about human nature itself. Power without humility eventually destroys itself. That pattern appears throughout all of human history. Great leaders rise and fall. Powerful nations collapse beneath pride. Men trusted with influence slowly become consumed by the belief that they deserve more than they were ever meant to possess. Lucifer's downfall reflects a truth humanity continues struggling with even now. Pride blinds people long before it destroys them. By the time Lucifer recognized what he had become, the rebellion had already consumed everything around him. Ancient scripture describes Lucifer falling from heaven like lightning cast from the sky. One moment, he stood among glory beyond human understanding. The next, he was separated from the very presence he once lived beside. The throne he desired could never belong to him. The authority he tried to seize slipped beyond his reach forever. And in the silence following the rebellion, heaven itself was forever changed by what had happened there. But according to Scripture, Lucifer's rebellion did not end in heaven, because after the fall came something even more dangerous. The rebellion that began near the throne of God would eventually spread to earth itself. And the same pride, deception, and ambition that corrupted Lucifer would soon appear again in humanity's story. Perhaps the most frightening part of Lucifer's story is not the war in heaven or even the fall itself. It is the realization that his greatest weapon was never raw power. According to Scripture and generations of interpretation, Lucifer's strength came from something far more subtle. He understood persuasion. He understood influence. He understood how pride could slowly reshape the mind until rebellion no longer felt wrong. It felt justified. Perhaps the reason Lucifer remains dangerous is because his greatest weapon was never force. It was persuasion, pride, deception, the ability to make rebellion feel justified. That pattern has followed humanity throughout history. Very few people begin believing they are evil. Most people convince themselves their actions are necessary, deserved, or justified. Pride rarely enters loudly. It enters quietly through ego, comparison, resentment, and ambition. It whispers to people that they deserve more recognition, more power, more control. And once pride takes root deeply enough, it becomes incredibly difficult to recognize the damage it causes. That is exactly what happened to Lucifer. The angel who once reflected glory became consumed with glorifying himself. And even today, humanity still fights the same battle. You can see echoes of Lucifer's rebellion everywhere in human history. Powerful leaders consumed by ego, nations collapsing beneath arrogance, relationships destroyed because neither side is willing to humble itself, people sacrificing morality for influence, status, and control. The same temptation that corrupted Lucifer continues repeating itself generation after generation. That is why this story still unsettles people thousands of years later. It does not simply describe the fall of an angel. It exposes something dangerous within human nature itself. And maybe that is why Lucifer's story remains so relevant today. Because the battle was never only about heaven. It was about the human heart. Pride still blinds people. Deception still spreads through influence. Ambition still convinces people they deserve what was never theirs to possess. Lucifer's rebellion may have begun near the throne of God, but according to Scripture, its consequences reached all the way to earth and into humanity itself. And that leads to one final unsettling question. If Lucifer could deceive angels in heaven, how easily can pride deceive us? Lucifer's downfall began long before the war in heaven. It began the moment admiration became more important to him than obedience. At some point, the honor surrounding Lucifer stopped being something he appreciated and became something he depended on. The praise, the influence, the beauty, the authority near the throne of God slowly reshaped the way he viewed himself. And that transformation is what makes this story feel so personal even today, because the same pattern still exists within human nature. Lucifer's downfall began when admiration turned into self-worship. And even today, pride still destroys hearts silently. Most people do not recognize pride while it is growing inside them. It often hides beneath success, talent, intelligence, or influence. A person begins receiving admiration from others and slowly starts believing they deserve more than everyone around them. Humility disappears little by little. Gratitude fades. Relationships begin breaking apart because ego becomes more important than truth. History has shown this repeatedly through powerful leaders, wealthy empires, celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people alike. Pride convinces people they are above correction, above limits, above accountability. And once that mindset takes hold deeply enough, destruction usually follows soon after. That is why Lucifer's story continues to resonate across generations. It is not simply about an angel falling from heaven. It is about what happens when self-focus replaces humility. Lucifer had extraordinary gifts, but instead of using those gifts to honor God, he became consumed by his own reflection. The tragedy is that he likely did not recognize how far he had fallen until it was already too late. And many people today follow the exact same path without realizing it. Ambition becomes obsession. Confidence becomes arrogance. Admiration becomes addiction. The frightening reality is that pride rarely destroys a life instantly. It works slowly, quietly, silently. It changes the way people think before it changes the way they act. It convinces them they deserve recognition above others. It feeds comparison. It creates resentment. And eventually, it blinds people to the damage they are causing around them. Lucifer's rebellion reveals how dangerous pride can become when it grows unchecked. Because if it was powerful enough to corrupt the most admired angel in heaven, then no human being is completely immune to it. After everything we have uncovered about Lucifer's fall, one question still remains. Was pride the true cause of the rebellion? Or was something even deeper happening in heaven long before the war began. Because when you look closely at the story, Lucifer's downfall was not simply the collapse of one angel. It became the beginning of a conflict that, according to Scripture, would eventually reach humanity itself. The same pride that consumed Lucifer continues shaping nations, leaders, relationships, and human hearts even now. And perhaps that is why this story still unsettles people thousands of years later. It forces humanity to confront the possibility that the greatest battles are often the ones taking place silently within us. Do you think Lucifer's rebellion began with pride alone, or was something deeper happening in heaven? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into one of Scripture's most mysterious and haunting stories, subscribe for more cinematic documentaries uncovering the hidden side of biblical history, ancient mysteries, and the psychological truths buried within them. Because the next story may be even darker than this one.